They vanished into the shadows of history, hunted, betrayed, erased from the world by crown and cross alike. Their castles fell, their banners burned, and their names whispered only in fear or reverence. But some say they never truly disappeared. Some say they waited, watching, remembering, preparing. And now, the silence breaks. In the heart of ancient stone, beneath golden domes and sacred dust, a familiar step returns to the holy ground. Not with fanfare, not with war drums, but with secrets and a mission centuries in the making. The Templars, once guardians of the Grail, now phantoms of forgotten power, are returning to Jerusalem. Is it myth? Is it prophecy? Or is it something far more real than we ever dared to believe? A whisperscape of stone beneath the sacred sky of Jerusalem, where the dust of centuries clings to stone like the breath of time itself, there lies a silence deeper than sound, a silence that speaks. This is not the silence of absence, but of memory. A silence that holds secrets older than empires, heavier than crowns, and far more enduring than the bones of kings. Walk its narrow alleys at twilight, and the very walls seem to exhale not in words, but in whispers. These are not mere stones. They are witnesses. They have watched centuries turn like pages in a forbidden book, recorded with every crack, every scar, every faint carving left behind by hands long vanished. They have borne the weight of prayers, of betrayal, of prophecy, and of conquest. But among all the whispers held within these stones, one name echoes differently, not louder, but deeper: the Templars. Once clad in white cloaks marked with crimson crosses, they came here not as conquerors, but as guardians. Sworn to defend the pilgrims, they became pilgrims of a different kind. Seekers of truths buried beneath the dust of the Holy Land. Their swords glinted in daylight, but their true power lay in the shadows. They mapped catacombs beneath churches, sealed scrolls inside the walls of chapels, and traced invisible lines of influence that extended far beyond the city's gates. And then they vanished, or so the world was led to believe. But the stone remembers. There are doorways in Jerusalem that open to nowhere, arches that frame only darkness. Some say beneath them lie hidden corridors not abandoned, but waiting. The foundations of the city are not simple layers of architecture, but strata of intent. Beneath churches, beneath mosques, beneath the very flagstones of the ancient markets, lie vaults where echoes linger, echoes of rituals, of codes, of oaths whispered beneath flickering torchlight. On a quiet evening, as shadows stretch like veils across the streets, a faint presence stirs. You may not see it, you may not hear it, but if your breath stills and your heartbeat slows, you might feel it, a shift in the air, a tremor just beneath the skin of time. It is the sound of something returning. They were hunted, betrayed, scattered across continents. Their symbols were outlawed, their names erased from scrolls, their legacy buried under politics and fear. But a structure built on silence does not crumble in noise. It retreats, it adapts, it endures. Now in the 21st century, Jerusalem rises into modernity. Glass panels reflect the sky where once iron helmets gleamed, cafes and cell phones mask the cadence of chants long forgotten. But below, beneath layers of earth and history, the old network breathes again. A chamber hidden beneath the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. A sigil uncovered in a foundation stone during a quiet renovation. A whisper passed among scholars who dare not speak too loudly. And somewhere, perhaps in a private archive, a sealed envelope marked only by a red wax cross, untouched for centuries, yet perfectly preserved. Some say this is fantasy, others call it conspiracy. But the stones say nothing. They simply wait. The Templars were never merely a military order. They were builders of fortresses, of symbols, of systems. They left behind not only relics, but architecture of influence. Traces of their hand can be found in the geometry of chapels, in the placement of stairwells, in the alignment of shadows during equinox. Those who study closely find that their silence was a language, and the city, their manuscript. The whisper grows louder now, not because it seeks to be heard, but because someone, somewhere, has begun to listen again. There are men and women today, historians, architects, theologians, who have followed the trail not through archives, but through intuition. They sense a pattern, not in texts, but in space. They walk the Via Dolorosa and stop not where the signs tell them, but where the air thickens, where the stones grow warmer under their palms. They feel drawn to doorways that others pass by, and when they reach the heart of it, not the temple, not the tomb, but the space between, they feel it. The memory, the presence, the return. No swords drawn, no banners raised, just the slow reawakening of something never truly gone. The seal may have cracked, the scrolls may have faded, but the oath survives, passed in blood, in breath, in silence, and the city knows it always has. Perhaps the question was never whether the Templars would return to Jerusalem. Perhaps the real question is, did they ever leave? When they came the first time, the city was wounded. It bled silently beneath a sky of prophecy and dust, echoing the footfalls of thousands who had died for the promise of reaching it. Jerusalem, sacred to three great faiths, cursed by its own holiness, had endured yet another siege. In the aftermath of the First Crusade, its air hung thick, not only with incense, but with grief, confusion, and blood. The Christian banners now fluttered atop the ramparts. But peace had not yet found footing. The year was 1119. A chill clung to the morning air, even as the sun poured golden light over the ancient stones. It was then that a small group of knights, neither loud nor large in number, arrived not with conquest in their eyes, but with conviction in their hearts. They were not kings, they were not lords, they were, by all appearances, humble warriors in worn cloaks and weathered armor. But in truth, something far more dangerous had arrived. They were led by Hugo de Paillon, a knight of Burgundian blood, whose gaze held the weight of something deeper than devotion. With him were 8 others, only 9 in total. And yet, from that number would rise a storm of history that no empire, no church, no sword would ever fully silence. They did not seek riches. They asked for no castle, no land. Instead, they made a vow to protect the pilgrims journeying across the treacherous roads of the Holy Land. These were not just travelers. They were the faithful, the hopeful, the broken drawn across deserts and through hostile territory, simply to lay their eyes upon the church of the Holy Sepulchre, to touch the soil where their Savior once walked. But such roads were not paved in peace. Bandits, mercenaries, and remnants of war preyed on the defenseless. And so these 9 knights offered their swords not for gain, but for guardianship. They took a vow of poverty, of chastity, of obedience. They called themselves the poor fellow soldiers of Christ, and Jerusalem listened. King Baldwin II, then ruler of the Crusader Kingdom of Jerusalem, offered them quarters in the captured Al-Aqsa Mosque, which the Crusaders believed to be the remnants of Solomon's temple. That choice of lodging would change everything, for it was upon the Temple Mount that these knights found more than shelter. They found whispers, tunnels, chambers, and in time secrets. The legend says they began to dig. Not wildly, not like looters, but with purpose, quietly, systematically. Night after night, their torches flickered in the darkness beneath the stone platform where the temple once stood. What were they searching for? Gold, relics, or knowledge? Some say they found scrolls, ancient writings that predated even Christ. Others speak of hidden objects, sacred geometry etched into stone, the remnants of rituals lost to time, or even the Ark of the Covenant itself. The truth. No scroll confirms it. No Vatican record admits it. But something changed after that. The order grew, and not just in number, but in influence. Word of these knights reached Europe, and with it came wonder. Why were so few achieving so much? How had 9 men, with no riches, gained the blessing of both the church and crown? In 1129, at the Council of Troyes, the Knights Templar were officially endorsed by the church. Their rule was written guided by Bernard of Clairvaux, a Cistercian monk of immense spiritual weight, who declared them a new kind of knighthood. They were monks with swords, a paradox, some said, a divine necessity, said others. And yet, their origin remained cloaked in the shadows of Jerusalem. Because when they came the first time, they did more than walk its streets. They studied its bones, they mapped old catacombs, they learned the languages of ancient texts. They forged relationships with Eastern Christians, with mystics, with those who did not fear the truths beneath doctrine. They began to see Jerusalem not just as a city, but as a cipher, a spiritual code wrapped in architecture and sand. The church believed it was granting favor to a loyal order, but in truth, it had unknowingly blessed a silent force of seekers not only of salvation, but of secrets. For nearly 2 centuries, the Templars would grow from 9 knights in dusty armor to an international network of wealth, influence, and mystery. But their genesis, their spark, their truth, it began in the shadowed stones of Jerusalem, and the city remembers. Jerusalem shaped them, not just in body hardened by desert sun and blood-soaked sand, but in spirit. Within its ancient walls, among ruins more sacred than legend, the Templars did not simply become warriors. They became something else entirely, instruments of a purpose not fully their own, yet strangely destined. In the corridors beneath the Temple Mount, whispers clung to stone. Whispers of the first temple, of Solomon, of priest-kings and prophets. The Crusaders believed they had reclaimed holy ground, but the Templars, they came to understand that this ground had never truly been lost. It had only been waiting for those who knew how to listen. Those underground years were not recorded in any official charter. There are no papal scrolls that detail what was unearthed beneath the Al-Aqsa. But the transformation is undeniable. The knights who arrived with bowed heads and rusted steel began to speak with voices that echoed across kingdoms. They returned to Europe bearing no relics, no treasures to show. And yet, their presence carried weight like thunder without sound. How do 9 men command the fear and favor of kings? How does a poor brotherhood rise to hold lands, ships, and banks across an entire continent? Not by accident, not by miracle, by knowledge. The kind of knowledge that shifts the balance of power without raising a blade. The Templars did not just defend roads. They began building them networks of passage, of communication, of influence. They erected fortresses not merely to protect pilgrims, but to control regions. They established preceptories, trained generations of initiates, and wove themselves into the fabric of Christendom's most powerful structures. And through it all, they remained loyal to Jerusalem, because that was the source, the origin, the axis of the compass they followed. And it was not merely religious. No, what they found there, what they preserved in silence, was older than Christianity, perhaps older than recorded time. Bernard of Clairvaux wrote that they were gentler than lambs, fiercer than lions. And he was right. In public, they knelt at altars. In battle, they charged like a storm. But in private, within candle-lit chambers marked with the Red Cross, they studied, they mapped, they remembered. Some scholars believe the early Templars adopted Sufi practices, learned from Eastern mystics they encountered during their years in the Holy Land. Others claim they were initiated into older, esoteric traditions hidden beneath layers of religious history. Gnostic, Kabbalistic, perhaps even Egyptian in origin. The truth is elusive, obscured not by lies, but by the lack of record, or the careful removal of it. But we know this: when they returned to Europe, they were not the same. And neither was Europe. They introduced systems of credit, of guarded transport for the wealthy, not mere protection, but finance. The earliest seeds of modern banking. They held more land than some monarchs. They advised kings, crowned them, funded their wars, and at times denied them, all while answering only to the Pope. But that was only the surface. Beneath the armor, beneath the titles, the Templars remained servants of something deeper, something that had been born, or perhaps reborn, beneath the very stones of Jerusalem. And yet, they were careful. Their power was wrapped in humility, their knowledge sealed behind silence. They built cathedrals, yes, but each stone laid carried symbols that spoke only to those who had been taught to see. The rose windows, the compass points, the alignment of halls, not accidents of architecture, but codes, reminders of where it began. And always, that beginning led back to the holy city, back to the tunnels, back to the vow, because though they had returned to Europe, Jerusalem never left them. Every initiation, every command, every sacred rite bore its mark. It was not the city of churches or mosques or politics that lived in their hearts. It was the city of silence, of stone, of secrets. When they came the first time, they believed they were sent to protect it. But by the time they left, they understood they were bound to it. And Jerusalem, in its silence, never let them go. To this day, some believe the true archives of the order were never destroyed, that their most sacred relics were never burned, that before the arrest orders, before the fires of Friday the 13th, before the betrayal by crown and papacy alike, the inner circle acted, that the last Grand Masters sealed away what must never be found, and vanished not in defeat, but in retreat. Retreat. To where? To the network, to the codes, to the stones, and some say back to Jerusalem, back to the place where it began. But what if they never truly left? What if the Brotherhood only changed shape, shedding armor for anonymity, crosses for quiet observation? What if, beneath the hum of modern life, the ancient heartbeat of the temple still pulses quiet, steady, waiting not for war, but for awakening? Time has a way of wearing down memory. Kingdoms fall, documents burn, names fade, but symbols endure. And in the case of the Templars, their symbol never truly vanished. The Red Cross pate, once raised high over battlefields, continued to reappear subtly, curiously, in places far from the Holy Land and long after the Order's so-called destruction. Etched into cathedral columns where no one dared to touch them, hidden in the ceiling mosaics of forgotten abbeys, burned into the leather binding of unsigned manuscripts kept in private libraries across Europe. These were not accidents. They were breadcrumbs, not left for the many, but for the few, those who still listened to the stones. In the early 20th century, a team of restoration workers in Jerusalem, clearing debris near the Temple Mount, unearthed a narrow passage sealed with lead bricks. Behind it, a short tunnel led to a circular room carved directly into the bedrock. No inscriptions, no treasure, just one thing, a single pillar in the center, upon which was carved faintly, but unmistakably, the Red Cross. There was no public record of it. The discovery was quietly sealed again, but someone took a photograph, and that photograph circulated not in newspapers, but in envelopes, among scholars, among believers, among descendants of those who had long held suspicions that the Templars had left more in Jerusalem than just echoes. Other signs followed. In 1948, a young archaeologist working on the southern slopes of Mount Zion uncovered a cache of ceramic shards. On one piece too smooth, Too deliberate to be coincidence, a sigil identical to a known Templar seal was engraved. It had been buried more than 700 years. And yet, the design was perfect. In 1962, a scholar researching medieval shipping routes stumbled across a set of encoded ledgers stored deep in the Vatican's restricted archives. They referenced ships flying no national flag, bearing cargo of sacred geometry, making port not in France or Italy, but in Acre and eventually back to Jerusalem. Coincidence, or the slow resurfacing of a pattern buried too long? By the end of the 20th century, rumors of modern Templars began to take on new life. Not knights in armor, but men in tailored suits. Architects, bankers, historians, men who spoke in hushed tones, who gathered once a year in silent fortresses turned private estates, their conversations not recorded, their oaths not written. They bore no sword. And yet, their influence was sharp. And always, always Jerusalem remained the axis around which the whispers turned. Some claimed that within the labyrinthine foundations of the old city, beneath layers of Ottoman, Crusader, and Byzantine stone, lay sealed chambers that had never been opened. That the Templars, in their final hours before the fall, had returned to hide the unhideable. Not gold, not weapons, but something far more dangerous. Memory. Living memory. There are rumors of a black codex, said to contain names, coordinates, rituals, and prophecies. Passed from one hand to the next, each keeper knowing only one part of it. And every generation, the pieces get closer to one another, pulled by a gravity that defies history books. And now, in the 21st century, something stirs. Not loudly, not in parades or proclamations, but quietly in the deepening of shadows, in the convergence of signs, in the way certain doors open more easily than they once did. In 2011, during renovations to a Crusader-era church in the Armenian Quarter, a stonemason uncovered a narrow staircase descending beneath the apse. At the bottom, a locked wooden chest, iron-bound and cracked with age, its contents unknown. The Israeli Antiquities Authority sealed the site within days. The press never mentioned it. But weeks later, an unmarked plane landed in Tel Aviv. A single passenger disembarked, greeted not by customs but by a man in a long black coat. They disappeared together into the hills. No record, no return. Perhaps it was nothing, or perhaps it was the first quiet knock on a door that had not been touched for centuries. Because if the Templars truly did return, they would not announce themselves. They would not come with horses or steel. They would come as they once came. 9 men in silence, with purpose burning behind their eyes and a vow sealed by stone, not ink. And Jerusalem would feel it. It always does. The city is no stranger to cycles. It has seen empires rise, collapse, and rise again. It knows the patterns. It recognizes the return not by flags, but by frequency. A certain stillness in the air. A particular way the light bends at dusk. An old pathway walked again after centuries. Those who live closest to the old city have begun to speak in hushed voices of footsteps at night where no one walks, of candles lit in forgotten shrines, of a feeling, impossible to explain, that something ancient is waking, something that has waited, and is now, listening. When they came the first time, they came for protection. When they return, it may not be for defense, but for fulfillment. Because for all the speculation, the fragments, the half-buried relics and coded cathedrals scattered across Europe, one truth continues to pulse through the centuries like a hidden artery. They were not finished. The Templars were never built to last in one lifetime. Their architecture was generational, their knowledge layered, encrypted, passed not through ink on paper, but through initiation, design, and silence. They didn't build merely for the age of crusades, they built for the age beyond, for an unfolding they would not live to see. Some say their entire presence in Jerusalem was only the beginning, not of conquest, but of a cycle, a great work, something dormant, something waiting, a code, a map, a bloodline. And the city ancient and sacred remains the silent custodian of that secret. Through centuries of destruction, occupation, and war, Jerusalem has never let go of the imprint they left behind. Beneath the layers of politics, beneath the noise of armies and governments, the pattern holds. Vaults still sealed, stones that resist disturbance, an energy in certain corners that makes even skeptics pause. Why? Why does the name Templar still provoke unease in power circles? Why do governments classify documents relating to 12th century monastic soldiers? Why do modern institutions, with no declared religious affiliation, fund excavations in the oldest quarters of the Holy City? It is not nostalgia. It is preparation. There is a theory not written in history books, but whispered in the hallways of hidden libraries that the Order left behind a design, not a plan of war, but a design for rebirth. That when the world reached a certain threshold of chaos, of spiritual collapse, of forgetting the markers would realign. And when they did, those who had waited would act, not in violence, not in spectacle, but in silence, just as before. They would return to Jerusalem, not to reclaim land, not to rebuild the temple, but to awaken what sleeps beneath it, because when they came the first time, they were pilgrims with swords. Now they may be something else entirely. In recent years, more strange occurrences have fed the whisper. A coded message discovered behind a collapsed wall in a 12th century abbey in northern France, referencing the Ark of the Lion, reactivating in the City of Stone. A gathering of private individuals, former Vatican archivists, military historians, financiers in a monastery in Malta, all descendants of families once aligned with the Order. No press, no record, only rumors of an agenda, the return of the Circle. A dig near the dome of the rock halted abruptly by silent authorities. No reasons given, no findings disclosed. The only clue, a single photograph leaked to a scholar, a stone tablet bearing a seal never before seen, yet unmistakably Templar. Coincidence, again, or orchestration? Jerusalem has always been more than a city. It is a mirror. What you bring to it, it reflects. What you hide from it, it reveals. And what you seek from it, it tests. If the Templars are returning, they are not returning to conquer it. They are returning to answer it. Perhaps to fulfill what was never fulfilled, to complete the vow once whispered beneath its stones, to reawaken a covenant lost to time, buried by fear, but still pulsing quietly beneath every cracked tile, every forgotten tunnel, every whispering wall. And perhaps this time, they do not return as 9 knights in armor, but as 9 minds, 9 voices, 9 keys. Because this time, it is not about the sword. It is about the seal beneath the silence, the seal that was never broken, only waiting for hands that remembered how to turn it. The world today moves too fast to notice the slow reappearance of a symbol, too loud to hear the footfall of one who walks with purpose, but no sound, too distracted to understand the difference between a warrior and a guardian. But Jerusalem notices. Jerusalem remembers. When they came the first time, they planted something deep, not in soil, but in time. And now, time itself is bringing it back. You may not see them, but they are here, in the angle of shadow that falls just slightly wrong on an ancient stone wall, in the whisper of Latin spoken by a stranger at the back of a church, in the way a symbol appears, vanishes, and then returns slightly altered, as if moving through some secret rhythm. The Secretive Templars return to Jerusalem, not to fight, not to be seen, but to complete what was never undone, to whisper once more to the stone, and awaken the silence that has waited so long to be heard. The fall and the flight. It didn't happen all at once. Great falls never do. They begin with silence, a change in tone, a shift in glances, a tightening of words behind closed doors. Long before the arrests, long before the fire and blood, there were whispers. Whispers that the Templars had grown too powerful, too rich, too silent, that their loyalty was no longer to king nor cross, but to something hidden. The world had changed. Jerusalem had been lost. The Crusader kingdoms were collapsing like sandcastles to waves, and yet the Templars endured not by holding land, but by holding knowledge. They became something few understood, and many feared, invisible, yet present. Power without throne, faith without church, wealth without allegiance. And kings do not tolerate power they cannot command. In the early dawn of Friday, October 13th, 1307, the trap was sprung. Across France, as the bells of monasteries rang like any other morning, Templar commanderies were surrounded. Doors were broken. Brothers were dragged from their beds. Some fought. Some surrendered. All were accused of heresy, worship of false idols, secret rites, spitting on the cross, kissing of strange parts. Accusations designed not to reveal truth, but to break it. King Philip IV of France, a ruler more in debt than in faith, had moved swiftly, using papal authority as both shield and sword. The church, compromised and cornered, remained silent long enough for the smoke to rise. And rise it did, in Paris, in Tours, in Chinon, in Rome. In every place the Red Cross had stood, it now burned. But for all the arrests, for all the confessions wrung out through agony, something strange happened. The vaults were empty. The scrolls were gone. The ledgers, the maps, the relics vanished. No gold, no grail, no grand plan laid bare. Just ashes and the smell of fear. Because the Templars, at least the ones who mattered most, were already gone. Long before that cursed Friday, the highest circle of the order had seen it coming. The signs were too many, too clear. The slow freezing of support, the sideways glances at court, the subtle pressures from Rome, the sudden demands for audits, for oaths, for transparency. No, the fall did not surprise them. It had already begun long before the arrests, and so they moved, not in haste, not in chaos, but in perfect silence. Certain records speak of convoys leaving La Rochelle, a Templar port on the western coast of France, days before the purge. A fleet of ships, no flags, no manifest, no return. Some say they sailed to Scotland, where the Pope's orders held no sway, and where a brotherhood of stonemasons, later to be called Freemasons, offered shelter and secrecy. Others speak of Portugal, where the order was renamed, rebranded, and reborn under a different banner, the Order of Christ. But others speak of the East, of a final mission, a sacred return to Jerusalem, not as conquerors, but as shadows, to place what must not be found where it began, to bury not just treasure, but something far heavier, knowledge. Because while kings crave gold, the Templars knew knowledge is the only wealth that survives fire. And so they fled, not like cowards, but like keepers, guardians of a code too dangerous to leave behind. They did not run into exile, they vanished into strategy, each taking a piece of the whole, a name, a map, a word, a number, scattered like seeds across continents, across generations. And they waited. In the north, they became ghost stories told by candlelight knights who walk through wall guarding vaults that no thief can find. In the east, they became myths, foreign warriors who understood the lines of the land better than the locals themselves. In cities, they became architects, bankers, advisors, never loud, never exposed, but always watching. And still, Jerusalem called, perhaps not with words, but with memory. Because the fall did not erase the bond. The Temple Mount, their genesis, remained unfinished. Something had been left beneath it. Not just stone, not just relic, but a legacy that could not be transferred, only returned to, only fulfilled in the place where the vow was made. There is a story found in the margins of an obscure 15th century journal in Catalonia of a man cloaked in white with a crimson cross, arriving in the holy city in disguise. He carried no weapon, only a sealed box. He was seen speaking to a priest in the church of the Holy Sepulchre, then disappearing into the catacombs beneath it. He was never seen again. The journal ends with the phrase, "The guardian has rejoined the vault." For centuries, these fragments were dismissed as fantasy, crusader nostalgia, esoteric nonsense. But too many connections have surfaced since. Too many seals matching seals, too many maps pointing to places that were never meant to be found again. And in recent decades, the whisper has grown louder. Satellite scans of Jerusalem show heat signatures where none should exist long. Cold tunnels suddenly warm again. Cryptographers have uncovered patterns in 13th century cathedral floor plans that, when mapped, point to a convergence beneath the dome of the rock. And in 2001, a scholar in Rome found a cipher embedded in the stained glass of a ruined Templar chapel in Languedoc. It translated to, "Not the end, merely the concealment." The vow holds. The city breathes. The flight was never an escape. It was a migration of mission, a preservation of silence until the world was again ready to hear it. And perhaps that time is now, because the signs are converging again. Old bloodlines once thought extinct have resurfaced in unexpected places. Documents long considered lost are being rediscovered, and people unknown to each other across continents have started dreaming the same dream, of a staircase beneath the earth, of a light that flickers on stone, of a voice not speaking, but remembering. Perhaps the Templars are not returning to reclaim anything. Perhaps they never left. Perhaps the fall was not a defeat, but a disguise, a casting off of armor for something more enduring. And now, centuries later, the disguise is wearing thin. The world is noisy, distracted, but not immune to silence. And in the quiet spaces in ruins, in rituals, in the slow turning of dust in torchlight, the oath awakens. Not to raise an army, but to open a door, because when the fall came, they did not burn with it. They passed through it, and when they fled, they did not run from fire. They carried the flame. Echoes in the stones do not speak, but they remember. Every footstep pressed into ancient stone leaves something behind: weight, heat, intention. And over centuries, the stones of Jerusalem have borne the pressure of prophecy, pilgrimage, and war. Yet somewhere beneath the ruins and restoration, beneath the chants and the church bells, there remains a whisper not of language, but of legacy. Not every echo is sound. Some move through time. Some wait. And now they are beginning to stir. The Templars were never just men of sword and cloth. They were men of structure. They believed that form could reflect the divine, that architecture could speak truths no scroll could contain. For them, every stone laid was a sentence, every angle measured was a syllable, and every silence between was an invocation. Look closely at any surviving Templar chapel in Tomar in Lyon, in London. Beneath the layers of sanctity and shadow lies a code geometry that whispers to those who see, proportions that mirror constellations, corridors aligned not with borders, but with stars. These were not buildings, they were maps, and Jerusalem was the key. It is said that during their earliest years in the city, beneath what the Crusaders called the Temple of Solomon, now the Al-Aqsa Mosque, The first 9 nights unearthed more than foundations. They uncovered what some referred to as the Vault of Silence, a subterranean chamber where the very rock bore symbols not seen since the days of Babylon. Etchings worn by age and water, yet still humming with presence. No gold, no relics, just stone pulsing like a sealed breath, waiting. They copied what they found, repeated it in hidden ways on pillars, in staircases, in the curvature of the baptismal fonts. But not to display, to preserve, to pass on. Because stone does not burn. Over time, those copies became echoes, replicas without origin, shapes whose meaning faded like a name spoken in a dream. And yet, those echoes persisted. In 1998, a team of historians studying medieval acoustics examined the subterranean halls beneath the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Their findings were curious. At certain frequencies, the chambers produced harmonic vibrations that mirrored the mathematical ratios found in Gothic cathedrals across Europe. In 2003, an archaeologist in Portugal uncovered a hidden chamber beneath the Convent of Christ in Tomar. On its walls, he found a series of stone-carved reliefs, familiar Santa symbols, strange geometries, all surrounding a central design, an 8-pointed cross within a circle of stars. At its base, in Latin, the words Petra scribit, vox non est verba. The stone writes, "The voice is not for words." And again in 2017, during a digital mapping project beneath the Temple Mount, unexplained thermal anomalies were detected stone that radiated warmth long after the surrounding material had cooled. The pattern of height matched a spiral, invisible to the eye, but unmistakable in infrared, a spiral identical to those carved into ancient Templar floor plans. Are these mere coincidences? Or are we hearing, finally, the echoes left behind? Some believe that within certain structures, the Templars embedded not symbols, but sound resonance chambers, where chants and silence would interact with geometry to awaken a memory. Not in the building, but in the listener, because memory to them was sacred, and memory embedded in stone was eternal. There are accounts, scattered through obscure text, of rituals performed not with relics, but with movement, walking a particular path across particular stones. Speaking, no words. Only breath, measured and aligned with the space around them. These were not ceremonies of show, they were reactivations, a way of speaking to the structure, and through it, to the past, and Jerusalem was the original frequency. When they came the first time, the city had already endured thousands of years of sound, shouts of siege, cries of worship, the low murmur of prophecy. But the Templars did not shout. They listened, they mapped, they walked, they learned the shape of silence. And when they left, when the fall came, they took pieces of that silence with them. That's why, even now, there are corners of the city where something shifts in the air. Places where time bends, where modern machines fail, where animals refuse to enter. These are not cursed places. They are tuned places, holding a frequency so old it feels like fear, but is closer to reverence. There is a stone near the base of the western wall, barely visible, carved with a pattern that does not match any known period of Jerusalem's architectural history. It spirals inward, not like ornament, but like a funnel. And if you stand near it at sunset, you will feel it, a subtle vibration, a hum, not in the air, but in your ribs, as if the stone itself is remembering. Echoes in the stone do not age. They wait. In 2020, a private collector unveiled a set of Templar documents allegedly recovered from beneath a crumbling monastery in southern Italy. Among the parchments was a passage, unsigned, undated, written in a blend of Latin and early Occitan. It read, "What we cannot carry, we place in the stone. What we must hide, we teach to silence. The city holds the breath of our purpose, and when the breath returns, so shall we. If authentic, it changes everything, because it suggests the fall was never a fracture, it was a planting. The Templars didn't bury secrets out of fear. They embedded them as seeds waiting for the right season, the right vibration, the right breath. And in recent years, that breath has returned. Not through armies, not through banners, but through resonance. Architects who never studied ancient symbols now draw them unconsciously. Pilgrims walking the old streets report dreams of doors that do not exist. Drones mapping Jerusalem's underground find patterns that match no logical structure, but mirror the spiral carvings found in 12th century Templar commanderies. Something is awakening. Perhaps the Templars are not returning to reclaim anything. Perhaps they are returning to respond. To the city. To its call. Because Jerusalem remembers more than history. It remembers design. It remembers sound. And above all, it remembers purpose. Every echo in its stone is a message. And someone, somewhere, has started to listen. The guardians of nothing and everything. What does it mean to guard something you cannot hold? What does it mean to carry a purpose that cannot be named? The Templars were called many things: warriors, monks, masons, traitors, saints. Yet none of those names ever captured the truth of who they were in their deepest silence. Not crusaders, not conspirators, but something far more paradoxical. They were the guardians of nothing, and the guardians of everything. To the outside world, they were men of function. They protected the roads. They built fortresses. They fought, prayed, administered, managed. Yet within the order, beyond the reach of kings and chroniclers, there existed an understanding that their true duty was not to a church or a crown, but to a mystery that had no shape, no object, no doctrine, a mystery that lived in the space between things. It is said that during their years in Jerusalem, beneath the Temple Mount, they did not find the Grail. They found something worse or better. They found the absence, the hollow center of all things, the silence from which meaning arises, the void that speaks only to those who no longer need to hear. That was the secret, not an artifact, not a bloodline, but a revelation, that the sacred cannot be possessed, it can only be served, and to serve it truly, one must become invisible. So they erased themselves. They wrote in codes no one would understand without initiation. They buried records where none would find them. They faded their symbols into architecture, hid their paths in geometry, and cloaked their rituals in paradox. They became guardians of the unseen, not because they wished to control it, but because they understood no one can. To look too long upon truth is to go blind, and so the Templars position themselves around it, not grasping, but circling. Like planets around a star, they cannot touch. Each brother became a keeper of a fragment, not of data, but of discipline, not knowledge, but awareness. They guarded a presence, not a possession. That's why, when the flames rose on Friday the 13th and the Grand Master Jacques de Molay burned in silence, he did not confess, because there was nothing to confess, nothing to give, nothing that could be spoken aloud, because what they guarded could never be taken, and so they vanished. But they did not disappear. Instead, they dispersed, and in their dispersion, they became eternal. They slipped through borders, through generations, through the pages of history unwritten. One became a mason, one became a sailor, one a monk, another a teacher. Their symbols fractured like light through a stained glass window, scattered, yet still whole in essence, and in silence they continued to guard. But guard what? An idea, a code, a future? No, something more ancient than any of these. They guarded the emptiness at the center of meaning, the nothingness from which all purpose flows. It is no accident that many of their chapels were round. Circles have no beginning, no end, no corner in which to hide. They are spaces of return, like breath, like time, like memory. In those sacred circles, they practiced the art of presence, the discipline of standing before the unknown without trembling, of facing the center without needing to name it. And they understood this truth. To protect something truly eternal, you must become forgettable. So they did. Their names erased, their faces lost, their voices now only echoes in the stone. And yet, we still feel them. Why? Because what they served is not in the past, it lives in us. Every time a man steps away from power, when he could grasp it, that is their echo. Every time a woman chooses silence over spectacle, that is their discipline. Every time someone walks into mystery with reverence instead of conquest, that is their legacy. They are not coming back. They never left. They live in the breath between thoughts, in the stillness beneath the noise. They are the guardians of nothing, and in that, they guard everything. There is a passage, hidden in the margins of a Templar rulebook recovered from a crumbling vault beneath Rosslyn Chapel. The Latin is crude, almost hurried, as if written for no one but the writer. It reads, Custodimus non rem sed vacuitatem, et in vacuitate omnia. We guard not a thing, but the emptiness, and in the emptiness, everything. This is the heart of the matter. This is why their return to Jerusalem is not about reclaiming land or lifting swords. It is about resonance. Because Jerusalem is not just a city of stone, it is a city of symbols, a mirror, a threshold, a place where all paths converge not to meet, but to dissolve. Where religions overlap, where time folds, where memory does not fade but condenses. And in this alchemical crucible, the presence still waits. The same silence, the same void, the same whisper behind the veil. And the Templars, or those who have carried forward what they once began, are still positioned around it. They are not men in cloaks. They are not soldiers. They are not visible. They are the ones who know when not to speak, the ones who act without being seen, the ones who serve not a system, but a silence, the guardians of nothing. And that is why they endure. Because to hold something sacred, you must be willing to let go of everything, even your own identity, even your own story, and perhaps even your own salvation. This is not the story of a secret society trying to control the world. This is the story of a sacred discipline trying to protect it, and they protect it not by force, but by faith, not in a religion, but in the stillness, in the breath before the word, in the emptiness between meanings. And so they wait. In Jerusalem, in the shadow of the dome, in the silence of chapels where no prayers are spoken aloud, in the eyes of those who have seen too much and chosen to say nothing. Because sometimes it is not what is guarded that matters. It is who it is guarded, with humility, with patience, with absence, with everything. Reappearance in symbols are not decoration. They are language without sound. They are memory in form, and when they return, it is never by chance. Long after the Templars vanished from the public eye, their presence endured in the most unexpected way, not in armies or scrolls, but in marks, quiet, persistent, recurring, carved into stone lintels, sewn into robes, etched into coins, hidden in geometry. A cross, a spiral, a star, a rose, a double circle, a sword downward through a halo. These were not remnants. They were signals, breadcrumbs. Silent bells struck across time, and Jerusalem, as always, is the center where they begin to ring again. You walk its old streets, and the walls tell stories, not through speech, but in pattern. A worn stone above a door bears a barely visible 8-pointed design, not native to Islamic architecture, not aligned with any medieval Christian motif. But to the trained eye, it is unmistakable. The compass rose used by early Templar navigators, always pointing not to magnetic north, but to a specific orientation, toward the mount. Above a cracked archway in the Armenian quarter, Another carving emerges beneath layers of soot and weather. A red pigment, barely visible, traces a circle intersected by 4 lines the cross within the wheel. Not Crusader, not Ottoman, older. And beneath it, Latin barely scratched, Iterum venient. They shall come again. Symbols speak where words cannot go. In a world trained to forget, they are memory's rebellion. And they are returning. Modern pilgrims don't always know what they're looking at. A tourist takes a photo of an unusual tile design in the Church of St. Anne, 3 equal circles overlapping, set within a triangle of stars. She posts it online, captioning it "odd pattern." A scholar in Spain sees the image and trembles. It matches a floor mosaic found in a ruined Templar commandery in Aragon, and in both cases, the design isn't centered. It's deliberately tilted by 33.3 degrees. Coincidence or message? Because the Templars believed symbols were alive, not static, but dynamic. They moved through architecture like breath through a flute. Placement mattered. Proportion mattered. Even silence mattered. They believed a symbol poorly placed could lie dormant, but one precisely tuned, placed at the right angle, in the right space, under the right light, could awaken. Not the building, not the object, but the soul. Their symbols weren't made to be understood. They were made to be felt. And the world is beginning to feel them again. Across Europe, architects restoring old cathedrals keep encountering design anomalies, spaces that make no structural sense. Columns placed where they serve no weight-bearing purpose. Rooms that align with no entrances. And yet, when mapped digitally, these anomalies form internal constellations. Symbols only visible from above, or from the inside. In Jerusalem, thermal scans of certain stone facades near the Dome of the Rock reveal layering that defies historical expectation. A square within a circle, a heat pattern in the shape of a key. One researcher dismissed it as artifact interference. Another quietly began drawing the pattern by hand and found it already carved in a chapel wall in rural France. Symbols do not travel by themselves. They are carried. And some say the carriers are waking up. An artist in Lisbon begins painting a series of canvases. He doesn't know why, only that he feels compelled. Each canvas features a central vertical line flanked by 2 semi-spirals. A friend shows him a book on the Templars. The artist drops the brush. The pattern matches a carving found inside a Templar chapel in Tomar, once called the Echo Line. According to legend, if you whispered a vow at one end of the wall, it could be heard clearly at the other, through stone. Another case, a linguist in Jerusalem researching phonetic patterns of ancient Aramaic, stumbles upon a sequence of sounds that, when recited, produce resonance in a closed chamber beneath the Church of the Flagellation. The chamber isn't part of any documented structure. Its shape, octagonal, its center, a stone pillar with a red cross scratched, not carved, into the base. It isn't the sound that startles her. It's the echo that returns, with a different tone. Symbols do not only mark, they remember. In a world saturated with noise and light and data, we are taught to look past symbols, to see them as branding, ornament, mythology. But the Templars never saw them that way. They saw them as bridges between what is and what is not, between the seen and the unseen, between Jerusalem and the world beyond it. Every symbol reappearing today carries not a message, but a pulse, a kind of countdown, not to an ending, but to a recognition. Because the question has never been, are the Templars returning? The question is, do we recognize them when they do? Not in flesh, but in form, not in uniform, but in signature, not in words, but in symbols. There are patterns forming now, not just in stone, in people. Historians who never knew each other begin researching the same forgotten phrase. Cartographers stumble on old maps that, when aligned with current Jerusalem satellite imagery, reveal missing geometry, and most curiously, dreams. People from different countries, different cultures, start reporting the same dream. A circle of figures in white, their faces hidden, standing in silence around a stone well. The air is heavy. The city is old. And on the wall, just beyond them, a symbol glows faintly, something between a compass and a tear. They do not speak. They only place their hands on the stone. And then the dream ends. When asked what they felt in the dream, the answer is always the same, like I was being remembered. It is not the symbol that matters, it is what it awakens in us. Because perhaps the Templars were never guarding an object at all. Perhaps they were guarding a pattern. One so delicate, so old, so sacred it could only be passed through form, through structure, through symbol. A map of meaning, waiting to be seen again by eyes that have learned to stop searching with logic and start remembering with silence. And perhaps that time is now. In Jerusalem, a new project begins: underground mapping near the Mount. The team includes engineers, historians, and 2 people whose credentials remain restricted. They say nothing. They smile politely. But every morning, before entering the worksite, they pause. They place one hand on the wall, just for a second. When asked why, one of them finally replies, "It's how you ask permission." Symbols are returning. They are not prophecy. They are not warning. They are remembering. And we are not just finding them. We are being found. The purpose never died. A name can be erased. A banner can be burned. A building can crumble. But purpose is not so easily undone. Purpose survives in silence, in exile, in the pause between breath and speech. It waits not in monuments, but in men, not in records, but in resolve. And for the Templars stripped of title, scattered by fire, hunted by fear, the purpose never died. From the moment the first 9 knelt before the Holy Sepulchre, from the moment they drew their blades in oath beneath the stones of Jerusalem, they were not building an army. They were anchoring a vow not to defend territory, nor to protect a relic, but to preserve something far older and far more dangerous, a living path to the sacred, hidden in plain sight, always moving, always breathing, just beneath the surface of the world. They called themselves guardians, but not of places, of passage. Because Jerusalem was not just a destination, it was and remains an axis, a place where the boundaries between heaven and earth grow thin, a convergence of currents, cultures, and codes. And in the center of that convergence is not a throne or a treasure, but a threshold, a gate, not to power, to transformation. And the Templars, they were its keepers. They knew what few dared to accept, that the sacred is not meant to be possessed, only protected. That truth is not static, but a living stream, that every age forgets and must be shown again, not through domination, but by example. Quiet example, hidden example, humble example. So when their name was condemned, when their order was torn from the annals of history, they did not fight to be remembered. They chose instead to live on through others, through action, through imprint, through symbol and silence. The purpose moved underground, not downward inward, into lodges, into libraries, into lines of teaching that carried no flags, into builders and scholars, into men and women who would never claim the name, but carry the light. Because the flame is not in the uniform, it is in the discipline to stand between worlds, to protect what must not be corrupted, to wait until the world forgets, and then remember again. And now, centuries later, as the noise of modernity drowns out the quiet spaces, the purpose begins to rise again, not loudly, but inevitably. Why? Because every age of forgetting is followed by an age of remembrance. And the signs are all here, not in headlines, but in alignments. Symbolic patterns emerging in architecture once thought coincidental. Dreams repeating among people who have never met. A surge in interest not in religion, but in resonance, in sacred geometry, in esoteric scripture, in questions that no longer fear silence. The purpose never needed followers. It only needed conditions, the right soil, the right silence, the right eyes to look. Again, not outward, but inward. And Jerusalem, still ancient, still unresolved, once again becomes the place of return. Not for armies, for awareness. There are whispers now in the old city, not of prophecy, but of pattern. Restoration workers on the Mount speak of unusual alignments in the stone. Scholars cross-referencing the Dead Sea Scrolls find matching phrasing in 13th century Templar texts. A newly uncovered fresco beneath layers of Crusader wall art bears a faint outline of a figure not holding a sword, but holding open a door, and above it the words, Non redimus pro domo, redimus pro luce. We do not return for the house. We return for the light. This is what the Templars always knew, that the mission was not preservation, but ignition, to keep the spark alive through darkness, to pass the unseen torch, to be present in a world asleep, not to awaken it by force, but to stay awake within it until it begins to stir. And the world is stirring. It is no longer enough to own, to build, to display. Now people seek what is real, what is rooted, what is resonant. They seek not spectacle, but source. And the purpose of the Templars, cloaked for so long in secrecy and slander, begins to reappear in its purest form. As guardianship, not over people, not over dogma, but over the door. Because every soul has one, a threshold within, a passage the world has taught us to ignore. And Jerusalem, in all its paradox, is a mirror of that passage. The city is not the point. It is the portal, the place we must go, not to conquer, but to see. To stand in the convergence of histories and hold the question, what is sacred? The Templars asked it once, and they found no single answer, only a vow to serve that question wherever it moved, however it appeared. And now, in a world desperate for meaning, the purpose surfaces again, not in one order, but in many awakenings. A woman in Brazil begins building sacred spaces with no architectural training, only dreams. A mathematician in Poland discovers Templar ratios embedded in the human heartbeat. A young student in Jerusalem sees a carved cross glowing briefly in moonlight, then gone. Not visions, reminders that the purpose never died. It moved, it hid, it breathed, and now it returns, not as a revival, but as a remembering of the sacred within the ordinary, of silence within noise, of duty within stillness. This is why the Templars return, not to claim, to align, to step once more into the flow they never left, to remind us that beneath every empire, beneath every dogma, beneath every ruined wall, the light still waits, and that someone somewhere must always guard it. The return, they were never meant to return the way they left, not with banners, not with swords, not with the thunder of hooves or the clang of steel, because their exit was never truly an exile. It was an eclipse, and every eclipse, given time, becomes a return of light. When the world forgot them, they remembered the world. When their name was buried, their vow was not. And now, centuries later, the vow awakens, not in the eyes of kings, but in the hearts of the quiet, not on the battlefield, but in the silence before dawn. This is how they return, not as soldiers, as presence. It begins, as it always does, in Jerusalem, a city that knows how to listen, a city that has seen too much to be impressed by noise, and yet trembles at the sound of soft footsteps echoing in forgotten stone corridors. It is here that the first signs re-emerge, not in public, but in pattern, in geometry, in resonance, in timing. The pilgrims come as they have for 1,000 years. But among them are those who do not kneel out of ritual, but out of memory. Their hands trace old grooves in the stone, not because they were told to, but because they remember where the light used to fall. They are not dressed alike. They carry no emblems. No visible sign binds them. And yet they recognize each other instantly. In the nod, in the stillness, in the silence shared across a crowded street. They do not speak the name. They carry it in breath, and the city responds. A locked gate in the Christian quarter creaks open after decades, revealing a hidden stairwell. A mosaic long thought ornamental turns out to be a map leading to an unmarked chamber beneath a Crusader church. In the courtyard of Al-Aqsa, a child playing with chalk draws a symbol no one remembers, teaching her a double cross inside a circle, identical to one carved beneath the Temple Mount 900 years ago. And still, the world does not notice, because that is the way of the return. It is not loud. It is not televised. It is not declared. It unfolds like breath. It waits like shadow. It moves like memory. But it is unstoppable. One by one, they arrive not drawn by conspiracy, but by calling. Some are historians. Some are architects. Some are farmers, linguists, musicians, monks. They come not to take back. They come to re-inhabit, to stand again in the frequency, to align the axis, to seal what was once opened, or perhaps to open what was never finished. They walk the Via Dolorosa in silence. They spend hours at walls no one else touches. They place their palms on stone not to pray, but to listen, because they know the city is awake. And beneath its markets, beneath its shrines, something stirs. The old vault breathes. There are rumors, of course, whispers among academic circles, satellite scans that show inconsistencies, thermal echoes under Mount Zion, sealed wells that ring hollow in a way that defies engineering logic, documents missing from Vatican archives, DNA tests that link old European bloodlines to unexpected regions. But rumors are only smoke. The fire burns deeper, because the true return is not a matter of proof. It is a matter of recognition. You can see it in the way a man pauses before stepping onto a particular slab of stone. You can hear it in the way a woman hums an ancient scale while descending into an empty chapel. You can feel it when two strangers make eye contact in a ruined fortress, and somehow know exactly why they are both there. They do not speak of Templar codes. They do not seek the Grail. They are not chasing myth. They are fulfilling memory. Because the return is not a resurrection. It is a remembering. The breath once spoken is being taken again. The purpose once buried is being lived again. But not in full view, never in full view. They move like the wind across the olive groves, like the reflection of moonlight across the dome, like the flicker of candlelight behind stone. And always, always they return to the mount, because the vow began there. And something unfinished still lingers. A chamber sealed, not by stone, but by timing. A frequency not yet unlocked. A silence waiting for the final breath to harmonize. Perhaps it is not a door in the physical sense. Perhaps it is a door in the world's soul. A return not of bodies, but of balance. Because the world is tipping. Too much noise. Too much fracture. Too much forgetting. And so the Guardians return, not to fight, but to anchor, to hold stillness in the chaos, to re-establish the center, to remind the stones that they still remember. This is the essence of the return. It is not a moment. It is a movement, a rising, a gentle gathering of those who never fully left and those who were always meant to come back. It is not the return of the Templars. It is the return through them, through the geometry they left behind, through the codes, through the vow, through the silence. And in that silence, the mount pulses again. Jerusalem sighs, and beneath its breath, a forgotten key turns. A candle in the dust. Not every return begins with a roar. Some begin with a whisper, or with a flicker of light in a place long forgotten. There is a chamber no larger than a stable beneath the old city. Its ceiling is low, its air dry, its walls blackened by centuries of breath and soot. No inscription marks its entrance, no map leads to it. Yet someone, somehow, keeps the candle lit. It is a single flame, nothing more, nothing grand, but it has never gone out, not through war, not through empire, not through the rise and fall of kings or the clash of faiths overhead. The candle burns still. Some say the chamber was once a prayer room. Others say it was a passageway for initiates, a threshold of silence. But those who find it, those few drawn not by GPS or guidebook, but by instinct, speak of something else entirely. A presence, not a ghost, not a god, but something, listening. They kneel, though they do not know why. They do not speak, though no one tells them to be silent. They feel the dust around them, warm to the touch, and they understand not with the mind, but with the marrow that this place remembers. And the candle, small as it may be, burns in defiance of forgetting. Perhaps that is what the Templars always knew, that history is not held in museums, that truth does not survive in headlines, it survives in the flicker, in the spaces the world walks past, in the flame that burns in hidden chambers while the world above forgets its name. They knew the world would forget, that empires would rewrite them, that popes would silence them, that even those who believed in them would eventually look away. But they also knew that the vow would remain, not in stone, not in parchment, but in practice. And so they left pieces of that practice behind, in the form of architecture, in the shape of symbols, in the echo of footfalls across Jerusalem's worn stones. But most of all, they left it in the dust, in the dry breath of forgotten rooms, in the places where no one sings, and yet the air still hums. This chamber, with its candle, is not important because of what it holds, but because of what it keeps alive. Stillness, attention, a reminder that purpose can live without title, that light can survive without recognition, that a single flame, burning in silence, can hold the weight of centuries. Perhaps that is what the return is really about, not reclaiming history, but rekindling it, not as a grand gesture, but as a quiet offering. The candle does not ask to be worshipped, it only asks to be seen, to be noticed, to be carried not with the hands, but with the heart. A pilgrim once wrote, in a journal found decades later, buried beneath the stones of the Church of St. James, "I found nothing in Jerusalem, and yet something in me remembered everything. In a dark room, a candle burned. I did not light it, but I believe it was waiting for me." This is how they return. This is how they always return, as flame, as dust, as memory that refuses to be buried. They vanished from the pages of history, but not from its rhythm. They were silenced by kings, scattered by crowns, and buried beneath centuries of misinterpretation, yet their presence never left us. It lingered in stone. It breathed through symbols. It waited patiently in the places no one thought to look. And now it returns, not as prophecy fulfilled, but as memory awakened, not to conquer, but to remind, not as a brotherhood, but as a presence, a quiet order still walking between time and eternity. The Templars never needed monuments. Their greatest temple was always silence, their deepest oath not to power, but to purpose. And today, As we trace the echoes of their return through Jerusalem's dust and light, we are reminded that some missions are not of a single lifetime. Some purposes do not age. They are carried from hand to hand, from step to step, from breath to breath. To all of you who have followed this journey through ruins and ritual, through symbol and silence, thank you. Thank you for walking these corridors of memory, for listening not just to the history, but to the spaces between it, for remembering that the sacred is not a story of the past, but a presence in the present. And perhaps somewhere out there beneath the same sky, along the same stones, a single candle still burns, waiting for you to see it. Thank you for watching, and until we meet again, stay quiet enough to hear what the stones still whisper.